We have to be very careful about the language that we use. There is evil in the world, and it's very easy to slip into it. One of the problems with evil is that it is like a disease, and once it takes hold, it grows. I think, and I thought from the very beginning, that the debate about Europe was in danger of being overtaken by a debate about immigration, and that is exactly what has happened. The immigration debate is an excuse for some of the worst aspects of a sort of insular character. We saw it in Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. We saw it in Theresa May's Hostile Environment. We saw it, oh my goodness, we saw it possibly even right the way down to Churchill's talking about Indians, Disraeli talking about the Irish. It is there in our national character. It's certainly there in the at the core of the Conservative Party, but I don't think the Conservative Party is quintessentially a racist party or a misogynist party or a party that is not conscious of its national and international character, of its remit to conserve what is good. It's the Conservative Party, after all, that has had three women at its helm, that has now got a man with an Indian background as Prime Minister. This is the most diverse party, not only in our nation, but I think it leads the world in diversity in power. But at the same time, it has this core of racism which can be seized on and which can be exploited, and it has been exploited by Mrs. May, by Suella Braverman, by Priti Patel. Oddly, it is extraordinary. And the interaction between, or the lack of interaction between Joan Salter, the 3-year-old girl, Fanny Zimmerbaum, who'd come over to the UK for refuge, a Polish origin Jewish family. They were in fact not granted sanctuary in Britain when they were fleeing their home. Instead, they had to scramble through Europe and went across the Atlantic to an orphanage. Joan herself went to an orphanage in America, and only years later was she reunited with her family in London. And she remembers that her parents were thoroughly broken by that core of racism and hostility which lies at the heart of our governing party. And it shares that heart with this extraordinary sense of diversity. We have these two beating hearts, like some sort of perverse Doctor Who. It's very, very worrying. And when she talks about being reunited with her parents who were thoroughly broken, she is talking about the destruction of human beings by our flawed asylum system, our utterly flawed asylum system. And when she was much older and studying for a master's degree, Joan Salter looked at the archives, and she read the parliamentary debate in 1943 about the 2,000 Jewish children, of whom she was one, being refused British visas, and who were then deported to Hitler's Germany to be gassed. How Anthony Eden claimed no knowledge of the matter. And yet, once she looked at the memos and the memorandums and the minutes of meetings, she would know that this was not true, that there was a war cabinet meeting when these issues were discussed, and yet the children were abandoned in the same way that she was. So for Suella Braverman to stand there and simply not to acknowledge the story that Joan Salter was telling, and to go on and on about me, and about her family and her apparent difficulties, which are slight in comparison, is yet again to ratchet up that extraordinary contrast between the two hearts that lie at the centre of the Conservative Party. This extraordinary heart of diversity and inclusion, and this extraordinary heart of perversion and exclusion. These two beating hearts, like some extraordinarily contradictory Time Lord. That is the Conservative Party, and that is something that needs to be dealt with if the Conservatives are ever to hold office again. Because I don't think we can ever countenance a hostile environment like the one planted, seeded by Mrs. May. She is the cause of much of the modern malaise. She is the cause, as much as the Brexit racism that was championed by Mr. Farage. And Mr. Farage, I think, would not claim to be a racist. He simply condoned the racism that was there because he thought it was not important. In the case of the Conservative Party, I think it's not that people think it's not important. I think Mrs. May has defined it as important. It's a different form of racism. It's a different form of hostility. This is a proactive hostility that somehow maybe the one beating heart thinks the other cancels out. It doesn't. It doesn't. It's not good enough simply to say, we have a woman in office, therefore we are not misogynist. We have a man with an Indian background in office, therefore we are not racist. We have a woman with an Indian background as a Home Secretary, therefore we are not racist. It simply isn't true. The one instance of diversity in high rank does not obliterate the oppressive perversity and racism to anybody who is asking for help. There, but for the grace of God, and Mr. Sunak, Suella Braverman, need to reflect on the fact that by a pure chance of fate, they're in a position of power. By a pure chance of fate, they could be in a dinghy trying to cross the English Channel.